welcome to another segment of Anomalies, a show that's about things that Dave Jinks and Dan Hall like to talk about, which are usually kind of out there on the fringe of life. This is the season, one of my favorite seasons, October, because of Halloween. I've always been really fascinated by Halloween. So tonight we're kind of going to have a Halloween-themed show, although we're not necessarily going to be talking about Halloween as a holiday, but the topic that draws us in tonight would maybe the horror of Halloween, so to speak. I mean, this is a time of year where people like to be scared, and so we thought about examining fear and what it means to be scared, why we like to be scared, why people are fascinated by horror movies. Maybe talk a little bit about some of the horror movies that fascinated us. So this is our Halloween horror bash, for lack of another term. So Dave, tell me about, are you drawn to Halloween or maybe the emotions that come with Halloween, this issue of fear or being scared? Is that something that draws you in any way?
Yeah, a little bit. Although the candy is
that was
maybe more what draws me in. As a kid, at least, it was the candy. And I recall hearing something about people who lack a certain chemical in their bloodstream or their brain or something like that, who lack it, are drawn to things that give them a physiological rush. I think it was they were lacking rather than they had too much of it.
Oh.
But the rest of us who maybe are not so adventurous as far as riding roller coasters and maybe going to horror movies, maybe we have just the right amount of that chemical or too much of it or whatever, but that makes sense, that people who are drawn to scary things, they find fun in scary things. It might be literally a physiological thing.
So it could be a chemical imbalance or chemical lacking in the bloodstream that causes people to want to go watch some horror movie or read some Edgar Allan Poe story.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting.
But I think we all obviously enjoy it to a certain extent, and especially as a kid, I did like going with my friends to the latest horror movie, whether it was a hack fest, silly blood and gore type of movie, or whether it was a psychological thriller. And I can say talking about some of the movies that I remember that I liked mostly as a kid, because that's when I went to see those things. You know, as a father with smaller kids and a wife that absolutely hates horror movies, I don't find the opportunity to go to horror movies much these days. But when I was a kid, I liked movies. I liked The Shining, although it just scared the bejesus out of me. I did like Alien. I think that's one of the ones that we, in our pre-show discussion, that we agreed on. Alien was one of those movies that's got everything in it. Just the psychological aspect, the just freak you out scenes, the just disturbing scenes, and character development that makes you really, that really pulls you into the movie and helps you get absorbed into the story. That was another one that I really liked. What about you? I know you have some favorites.
Right, and Alien is one I want to talk about, but your mention of The Shining recalls, for me, something Stephen King said about why he writes what he writes. And I'm sure he gets asked that question. I mean, people who meet Stephen King and then think about some of the books and the books that have been made into movies probably think to themselves, what the hell does this guy dream about at night? You know, he must be really weird. But two things that I wanted to say was that in this speech I heard Stephen King give, and to some degree it was about his book. I think the book is called Dance Macabre, and he wrote about horror. But in this speech he says two things. He said, where I get my ideas come from a simple telling of the completion of the phrase, what if, or what is the worst that could happen? And those seem to be the jumping off points for him writing about horror. But when you said The Shining, the other thing I remembered is that one of the reasons in this book, Dance Macabre, that he talked about why people like to be scared is that fear is a primal human emotion. We all have it. But horror, the genre of horror, whether that be movies or books, allows you to experience fear in a controlled way. Mm-hmm. So, like, you might be, I don't know what, you might be being held as a hostage in a in a hold up like in a 7-Eleven store, and you don't have any control with the horror and the fear that comes out of there. But if you go into the movie to watch The Shining, whichever version that is, you know that in the end, the Jack Nicholson character doesn't win out, so to speak, and the little boy, his son, and his mother escaped from the Overlook Hotel. And so you can leave that scenario and kind of with a sigh of relief, even if the movie didn't work out better, you're still in control. You can even get up in the middle of the movie and leave. You don't have to wait till it's over with. But in real life, when you're facing some situation that's particularly horrific, you don't have that choice. So his notion was that people like to be scared on some level, but really like to be scared or find it more acceptable when they can control that. And you can control that in horror movies and by reading books that have themes of horror, but you can't control that in real life.
Right, or you can do what my wife did, well, at the time she was my girlfriend, what she did when I dragged her to a Stephen King
Another
movie,
Stephen King movie.
Pet Cemetery.
Oh, I remember Pet Cemetery.
And she ended up, ironically, maybe, being a veterinarian. And I don't know what I was thinking. Well, actually, I do know what I was thinking. I was thinking I'm taking this girl to a movie, and girls, when they get scared, they want to grab onto you, and that's about the end of what I was thinking. And
pretty self-serving.
She did what you said. She didn't leave the movie theater. She was very scared. She slipped down behind the seat, closed her eyes because she was so scared of this movie. But she also wanted to sit through it because she knew that I kind of liked horror movies. So she was gonna put up with it
for you,
for me. So that was kind of she has not watched a horror movie since then, and it's been 20-some years. Some people just don't like that feeling. And like I said, there's obviously a continuum of people who just need that rush, that physiological feeling of fear of having ice water poured down your spine that we get. That
adrenaline junkie.
Adrenaline. And other people could do with much less of that feeling. And I think you're exactly right about the whole, it's a safe place to have that feeling in the confines of the movie theater in particular.
Well, let's go back now, since we're talking about movies and elements of horror that draw us in a lot. Let's talk about Alien, because that's one of my favorite all-time movies. Ridley Scott directed that, and of course, I'm trying to remember all the characters. Sigourney Weaver was Ripley, probably the most memorable character, because you have a strong female lead that defeats the alien rather than a strong male lead. Who else was in that? Tom Skerritt as the captain of the ship. Harry Dean Stanton, Yaphet Kotto as some of the crew. Veronica Cartwright, I think, was another character or an actress in that. And then, of course, one of the more famous characters is the Ian Holm character who plays the robot.
Yes.
That is, throughout that movie, you're kind of torn between is the robot a character that's here to help the rest of the crew defeat the alien, or is he some kind of evil tool of the corporation that wants to capture this alien and weaponize it, type of thing? So what was there about Alien for you that really made that a good horror movie, or a movie that's memorable as far as horror movies go?
I think for me it's been a long time, so it's hard to specifically tell what I was drawn to that long ago, and I was younger, of course, but I think you really bought into and felt for the characters, which of course is a good indication that a movie was well made when you start to feel along with the characters, and Sigourney Weaver especially was somebody you root for and you felt along with. You went through the varying emotions with that particular character. And of course, you and I, the space theme, the idea of extraterrestrial in whatever form, is always intriguing. And just the psychological suspense that it seemed to carry through the whole movie. And for me, also the confined area. There's always that, when you're confined to a particular spaceship, there's nowhere to hide, there's nowhere to go. Or in Friday the 13th or whatever, if they're stuck at the camp, there's nowhere to escape to. Or what's the other Stephen King one? Misery? Is that the one?
Where the writer's essentially captured by
the guy
a fan.
He's confined to the house, and so the whole show, the whole movie is about how will this person escape the confines that the prison cell, basically, in one form or the other, and will they get out? And of course, the idea of being trapped in space, that really is the final frontier. Where else can you go? So.
Well, and if you remember the what would you call that? It's part of the teaser for the movie. I know it was part of the movie poster, but I think it also became part of the actual language used in the trailer. In space, no one can hear you scream.
Was that Alien? Was that?
Yeah, that was Alien.
Yeah, that was.
So it's like you are trapped. You know, you are trapped. You know. The other thing about that, as I heard you talk, was I've heard some reviewers who, sometimes are looking at different aspects of a movie, and so what's the story about beside what we are seeing on screen rather. There was a review done of Alien that essentially said that Alien is a bit like a haunted house movie, except the haunted house movie is a spaceship, and the evil ghosts or spirits are the aliens, and you don't know where they're at. They're going to pop out at you at some time and scare the bejesus out of you and probably kill some of you, but you really don't know where they're at. And one scene that really sticks in my mind, and you're talking about building the suspense, there's Tom Skerritt, who's the captain of the ship, goes about trying to find where this alien has escaped. And some of the crew members have some kind of tracking device where they can track both the captain and the alien. And you see Tom Skerritt is moving around within these tunnels within the ship, and of course there's some ominous music in the background, and he can't see anywhere where there's an alien. But whomever's got the tracking device sees that this little alien, this blip, which is the alien, is getting closer and closer to Tom Skerritt. And in terms of like building suspense, because you're not really seeing the alien, you're just trying to feel the suspense, the anxiety that this Tom Skerritt character is feeling, and then you're seeing, as the audience, you're seeing this little blip that you know is going to ultimately kill him get closer and closer and closer.
Is it above or is it below? Where is it? And
where is it?
Like the slasher movies where the unwitting, scantily clad teenage girl walks into the room to peek around the corner or into the closet, and you're sitting there in the audience cringing, going, "Don't look in there. Don't go there." And
that's where they go, of course.
Of course, that's where they go. And I guess one of the questions we ask on this type of show is that feeling or that recurrent plot, is that a reflection of some deeper fear that humans have? Is that an indication of some greater underlying reality that we, for either reasons of survival or curiosity, that we feel the need to experience on some level?
So is that about curiosity? I mean, where the character, obviously the audience is saying, don't go in here because there's some nastiness that's on the other side of the door or some horrific kind of a thing that's going to scare the hell out of you. So the audience has a lot of awareness like this, but the person who ultimately goes in there seems to be totally oblivious to that. Do they go in there out of a sense of curiosity? Do they go in there out of the sense they want to be scared? And I guess maybe the answer to that depends on the movie, but is there a universal theme that goes with that?
Well, yeah, that's a pretty interesting question. It's about going somewhere that you know you shouldn't, maybe, or being oblivious to an obvious danger, or maybe it's just the feeling that you get in the audience of knowing something that someone else doesn't know. You get that feeling of superiority. You laugh and you say, "Oh, stupid, don't do that. Why are they so? Why are the characters so dumb in horror movies?" Is what you think. But if you were in that situation, maybe you would act in the same way. Now that the slasher films where it's just blood and gore and scenes are contrived to the point where there's little originality left, and you know that someone's just going to get hacked for the sake of seeing the blood. Those are a little bit different from, say, Alien or The Shining or I don't know, Halloween.
That's one of your favorite, John Carpenter's Halloween. That's
I like Halloween because, not to say it isn't a slasher film, but I liked the music, the moods that were built with the cinematography and the music, just so creepy. And I know that the music was, the theme was so simple, but yet, and I think you have that.
I've got John
soundtrack. Dan Hall has the soundtrack.
I've got all of his the soundtrack for all of his movies, and Halloween's one of my favorite ones.
And it's just a simple, repetitive theme The dun 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 dun, that theme, and it's just, what is it, 3 notes or something? And I don't know what that indicates, why that gives you that creepy feeling. What it almost moves into the realm of psychosis or the repetitiveness of a mental illness or something, that music. And then of course it's sharp or flat tones that for some reason carry that discomforting feeling.
Well, and then of course the major character in that movie, Michael Myers, is in a mental hospital because he's killed his parents. So that it's interesting how music can create a mood in a horror movie, because the other horror movie I'm thinking about that has a simplistic melody to it or theme to it is The Exorcist. Because to this day, when I hear that Tubular Bells, and I can't remember who Michael Oldfield was the person who wrote that song. It's a fairly simplistic kind of a repetition of tones, but because The Exorcist scared me on so many different levels that I just hear that music and I can feel the hackles on the back of my neck going up. And let's go back to Alien for a second, because there's another element, and maybe there's an element of this in Halloween and some of the slasher movies. Another thing that is kind of scary in Alien to me is, and I almost would call it kind of the gross out factor. And what I'm talking about in Alien is, of course, in the first part of that movie, the John Hurt character who goes into the wrecked alien spacecraft and is looking down in something that looks like a big egg, and this kind of thing this thing with the tail flies out, attaches itself to his space mask, burns through that, then actually attaches itself, the face hugger, attaches itself to his face and runs some kind of gross tube down his throat, and then wraps its tail around him. Now, then of course, in my mind, I segue to Reagan McNeil in The Exorcist throwing up all over the pea soup kind of thing that we've come to kind of make part of our culture, vomits all over Father Karras and Father Merrin. So it seems like there's a gross out factor that goes along with horror, that if you can make something disgusting enough, that also becomes scary. So what do you think about that perspective?
Well, that's certainly, it seems like it has to be done with some restraint, because you move from strategic use of the disgust, the emotion of disgust, and if you use too much of it, and it ends up just being a slasher film and scenes full of the fanciest Hollywood special effects with pools of blood and guts and all that, it almost moves off into a realm that it's funny. You gotta get the audience laughing at it because it's just so overdone and outrageous and sometimes fake looking. And so, yeah, there's that whole range of disgust. You have to, some of those movies, and Alien sounds like one that we agree on, it provided just the right amount of disgust, fear, suspense, character development. It really absorbed you, pulled you in, and triggered all the right emotions at the same time to build the maximum discomfort within that safe confine of the movie theater.
Yeah, and I think maybe another element, and I know we're talking a lot about Alien, but that's such a fascinating movie. The creature, to me, then just adds to that mix. I mean, I think it's H.R. Geiger who is the artist that did some of the prototypes for that creature, what the creature was based on, and then the creature itself that has many forms, starts out as kind of some kind of this face hugger kind of creature, morphs into some kind of developing embryo that bursts out of John Hurt's chest in that one scene in the movie where they're all sitting around having breakfast or whatever, and then is this really scary reptilian kind of thing that when you cut it, it bleeds acid. So I mean, what an extraordinary monster! The monster of Alien, beside all these other components that we're talking about, that creature becomes a really scary element of the movie for me.
And I think again, Alien was first mover, the front runner as far as Alien movies go, aliens in movies. And one of my complaints, I know we've talked about this before, is that it seems like every alien since Alien is the same shiny black reptilian, usually with telescoping body parts,
right,
and bony sort of structures with some sort of goo, glistening with goo of some kind. And
maybe that's the goo's the gross out factor.
It's that insectoid, just some sort of infected, gross. It's the whole combination of various disgusting things that kind of churn our stomach in terms of biological types of things, insects, spiders, and pus and infection and goo, and that's a pretty universal disgust creating type of image. And I don't like that has sort of become the norm in movies because it doesn't seem very original. I know it probably works because of all those factors, but it's disappointing to see that is what Hollywood has kind of settled on as the only kind of alien that's possibly out there. And there's certain variations of it.
But that's a big difference from when you're talking about Hollywood and aliens, which is a little segue from our discussion about horror. I think of Steven Spielberg's Close Encounters of a Third Kind. The gray that presents, or grays that present themselves, look nothing like Alien. I mean, they're totally different depictions of what creatures from outer space might look like.
That's right. I don't know if there is a scientific basis for expecting that there might be an alien that might look insectoid, or I don't know if evidence as far as what you might predict would arise somewhere else and evolve. So it's interesting how that was chosen, and especially the telescoping, like you said, the bursting, the incubation inside of human beings and bursting forth, and there's all sorts of really interesting symbolism in that type of a creature.
Yeah, talk more about the symbolism, because that interests me. So what's the symbolism there, and what's the meaning that you see?
As far as the alien?
Or this creature inside us, is that about control? Is that about people losing their own independence, being taken over by someone or something else?
I think, parasite, it is really losing control of your body, losing control of your ego. The whole possession idea is a strong theme through so many different movies. The Exorcist, of course.
And that's the one I'm thinking of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Carrie, just so many of them. It's the idea of being possessed by a different spirit and of course an evil entity, Poltergeist. Those sorts of movies just really play on that theme, and I think Alien is definitely put that into the mix. I think Alien really hit on all different levels, which is why it's such a classic.
Now, as I recall dates, because I kind of want to talk a little bit about The Exorcist, because that's one of my all-time favorite horror movies. Alien was made in like 1979, I think, or end of 70s, or first part of the 80s. Mm-hmm. So The Exorcist came out like 73 or 74. So Alien is kind of a composite of some of those things that you see in The Exorcist. It's almost a decade later and combines a bunch of different elements. I remember the first time, and I wouldn't go see The Exorcist in the movie theater, just the music that they would play in the trailer, Michael Oldfield's Tubular Bells, and the idea of being possessed, and then the news stories. And here's what I'm kind of interested in getting your point of view. The news stories that came out about The Exorcist when it first came out, it was so horrifying, so gross, so beyond the bounds of what had been seen on the film before, it resonated so much with audiences that people literally ran from the theaters. Of course, this is media, so I don't know how much this actually happened. Ran from the theaters thinking that they were possessed by the devil. So what kind of a movie causes that kind of experience? What is a movie capable of doing that would cause somebody to think that they were possessed by the devil and needed the Catholic Church to have an exorcist?
Well, yeah, a movie it's an hour and a half or 2 hours of bombarding you with a certain type of propaganda, really. Very effective propaganda. It's got the sound, the visuals, obviously, and 90 minutes or 2 hours is enough to really get into your head, so to speak. And so that's why horror movies, of course, are where people go to get the rush, to really be manipulated even. It's an attempt at manipulating your state of mind with all available tools, really. So I could see that being true. You go in there, and especially if you go in expecting to be bombarded with this and expecting to be affected,
you're probably going to be affected
by it, and says a lot about human nature. Again, this is supposed to be fun, a fun sort of psychological or physiological rush. There's always some segment of the population who's going to be affected disproportionately to the point where they'll not be able to escape from that confine, or they'll extend it beyond when most other people will go, wow, that was crazy. Oh well, I'm done with the movie. Back to my normal life.
Yeah, and maybe that had something. I don't know who those people were. It was just kind of generic reports about people running out of theaters. They could have been people who were mentally ill, and that just kind of pushed them over the edge. Interesting thing earlier about sound, you were talking about the music of John Carpenter, excuse me, in Halloween, and then the music of Michael Oldfield in The Exorcist. An interesting thing about sound in that movie, and I remember reading this, there was a famous character actor, Mercedes McCambridge, who actually did the voice of Reagan, the Linda Blair character, when she was possessed. And not only did she have kind of a raspy voice, and they somehow with microphones changed that up. They had all kinds of other weird sounds thrown in there. There were animals growling. There were cattle mooing. There was just all kinds of weird sounds mixed in with Mercedes McCambridge's recorded voice, all designed to kind of, I guess, convey the fact that the little Linda Blair character was possessed by some kind of a true demon that would cause these things. But that sound, today when I hear Reagan's voice, I watched that movie, and I have watched it a number of times outside of the confines of a theater, that unnerves me. That when she starts talking as if she were the devil, that voice, I once again feel the hair on the back of my neck stand up. So there's sound being used to create
something animalistic or primal that creeps us out to the maximum extent. And again, why are we so affected or disturbed by that? And I don't know what it is. If people we view ourselves as above the animals, as evolved beyond the primal nature, which with the primal brain, the monkey brain,
right?
And so when we're confronted with some of those things, we just naturally they naturally repel us because we view ourselves on a certain level, and the idea that we could be brought back, pulled back, or slide back into that, what we're presuming is a prior state of humanity, that maybe is something that we just can't accept.
That's interesting. The other thing I was wondering about with The Exorcist is, of course, I don't know that you'd make the same comparison with Alien, but The Exorcist, the movie that William Friedkin directed, in the book that William Peter Blatty wrote, is based on something that actually happened. If you've ever watched the Sci-Fi Channel, you probably heard of the Booth brothers, who are a couple of Brits who do a lot of documentaries, particularly on the paranormal. And they did a documentary, which I happened to get last Halloween, called The Haunted Boy, which is the story of, and I think his name is Robbie, and I'm trying to think what the last name is. It starts with an M. I'm for some reason drawing a blank. Maybe Manville. But this is the actual case that the church investigated that led to William Peter Blatty writing about Exorcist. And there's some pretty strong and weird stuff in that documentary, including excerpts from the priest's diary who performed the exorcism, where the bed that the boy was tied down on levitated, and that even to this day, and the exorcism allegedly took place in a hospital, not in a home, which is where we see Max von Sydow and Jason Miller trying to exorcise the demon in the movie. But even the exorcism took place in this hospital. Even today, the furniture which is in that hospital and that hospital has been closed, is under lock and key someplace. And people are hesitant to go in to check on that furniture because there's been some weird, paranormal kinds of things happening. So I guess the point is the fact, does The Exorcist become scarier than Alien in some respects? Because Alien's a fanciful story about possible space monsters, where The Exorcist is a true case.
Yeah, and that takes us into a more serious area where you have to ask yourself, is some of this based on reality? Could some of it actually happen? Do we have maybe a collective human memory that's suppressed, or understanding that we are just this far from insanity, this far from psychosis? Any of us could be affected by this, whether it's caused by demons, really, or if it's just something that humans will experience or create themselves even. So that's the ultimate, again, lack of control.
Yeah, someone or
frightened us.
something is possessing your body. You don't have any control over that. And maybe all you did to invite that spirit in was experiment with a Ouija board.
Right.
That's pretty, I mean, that makes the world look like a pretty dangerous place.
And I do have a specific example that would fit here. You know, the question is, what do we as humans understand that this is something that's bubbling beneath the surface? Whether we call it psychosis or possession or whatever, could this possibly happen in reality, the things we see on the movie screen? Well, I have one example that I wrote about in my book, which is really astonishing to consider, but apparently it was a real event. It happened in the first half of the 17th century, and there was what was described as a puritanical sect of Catholics. They gathered at the tomb of a minister, and at the cemetery the mourners began to exhibit strange convulsions and contortions, apparently accompanied by the ability to perform miracles, is how it was described. They were called the convulsionaires because they appeared to be in some state of seizure. It appeared to be contagious too, so it sort of spread through the group of mourners. Even more amazingly, it was said that they could cure ailments including cancer, arthritis, blindness, deafness, paralysis. Some even exhibited powers of levitation and clairvoyance.
Wow.
Is how it's explained. They were also, even more shocking, able to resist torture of all kinds. They could not be bruised, cut, punctured, crushed, or crucified. And strangely, all of those were attempted numerous times. So you might dismiss this as folklore, except that apparently it was witnessed by thousands of people. And it was documented in 1733 that more than 3,000 volunteers were employed to assist the convulsionaires as they twisted and distorted their bodies through the streets. And this event was documented by the Paris Parliament. They published, a member there published 4 volumes detailing the feat in 1737. And the king, it was King Louis XV who tried to halt the exhibition by these people by ordering the cemetery closed. Voltaire and the mathematician Blaise Pascal's niece were both witnesses to this bizarre event. And it's said that she, Blaise Pascal's niece, was herself cured of an ocular ulcer during the convulsionaires convention or whatever it was. So a mass change in reality, some sort of underlying shared psychosis or whatever it was, that obviously is a very extreme example, and it sounds completely unbelievable, but that's apparently what happened. That's what was reported.
And back then, true to the tone of what you wrote, exhibitions of supernatural behavior were thought just to be that, to have some kind of supernatural connection. Where today we might see levitation or, not remembering specifically one of the things that you mentioned. Oh, spontaneous healing of stuff. We could almost attribute that to having certain psychic abilities. Telekinesis or some kind of ability to heal using the power of the mind. So what used to be considered demonic now maybe has more of a real-world explanation, some kind of psychic ability.
And my theory is that some of these things that we kind of, for entertainment, we expose ourselves to, I think it's kind of dancing around the topic of this ability that's innate in humanity. It's a kind of lighter-hearted way of becoming exposed to that ability that maybe we have lost over the years or haven't been able to control, but we know it's there, and so we go scare the crap out of ourselves just for fun, in sort of dipping your toe into the waters of what we call the supernatural or insanity, really, because it is so potentially disturbing. And it's possible that humans don't know how to control it anymore, and that's what draws us to it, but also really repels us from it because it seems so out of control.
I wonder to some degree, and maybe this is more evident in movies like The Exorcist than some of the other movies we've talked about, like Alien, but a reoccurring theme that you see in many of these horror movies is good versus evil. And I really think about the dynamics of the story in The Exorcist because Jason Miller, the character that plays Father Karras, is a psychiatrist who's kind of lost because of his scientific bent as a psychiatrist, has kind of lost his faith. And then when this demon that the Max von Sydow character, Father Merrin, has encountered in Iraq, shows up in this little girl, possessing this little girl. They're in a battle. If you go into that room in the movie, and I think William Friedkin uses some interesting cinematography there by kind of walking us down to the door of that room, down the hall, the door of that room, and it's almost like what you said before. We really don't want to go in there because we know what kind of horrifying things we're going to see on the other side. But what the heck, we go in there anyway. It's this story of good and evil, this battle that's going on in this room, and in the end, Father Karras sacrifices himself when he becomes possessed by the demon, throws himself out the window and kills himself. It's almost like his faith is redeemed in some way. So I wonder if this good versus evil and who's going to win out becomes another element in the story of horror movies that that draws us to them and makes us like them.
And you brought up another theme that runs through them that's very powerful, and that's the idea of sacrifice. It's almost the religious Jesus sacrificed himself to save humanity or save for a larger purpose. So you see these characters who are essentially sacrificing themselves for a greater good, possibly. Mm-hmm. And that's the one where don't do that, but you must do that in order to further the story, or in order to give us some insight about what's really happening, or give us knowledge to continue, or just for the pure pleasure of watching somebody else do the sacrifice and not having to do it yourself.
And sometimes it seems like in the case of Father Karras in The Exorcist, it's a redemptive kind of a thing. He redeems himself as a father in the church and a believer in Christ by sacrificing his own life to win the battle, so to speak, at least partial victory, the battle of the demon over the Linda Blair character.
But the main character can never be the one who sacrifices him or herself, or very rarely, because otherwise that would be the end of the story, right?
Right.
So it always has to be a lesser player, a lesser character, although they can make the sacrifice that continues the story so that the hero can continue on.
Well, and as I recall in Alien, Alien had 3 sequels, right? And even in one of those sequels, of course this is how Hollywood works, Sigourney Weaver, I think in Alien, the third Alien movie, knows that she's been impregnated by the alien, and the company is trying to... She's been stranded on a penal colony where she's the only woman. There are all these criminals, these men, and there was an alien on board the ship when it crashed. And in that movie, the corporation lands on the planet and is trying to capture Sigourney Weaver, this continuing theme of, well, we want to take this monster and weaponize it. And she throws herself into a furnace and dies. But then she comes back in Alien Resurrection as some kind of a clone of Ripley. So there's an example of maybe where the ultimate character sacrifices for the betterment of all, but still, because of Hollywood's ability
resurrected.
is it can be resurrected in another sequel kind of a thing. So I don't know.
Well, some people might say that's where the series jumped the shark, so to speak, taking from the Happy Days episode where
Fonzie jumps the shark. Yeah.
Literally jumps the shark, at which point the show basically lost the audience because it was just too ridiculous and unbelievable to continue to buy into the story.
Right, because they didn't make an Alien 5, as I recall.
Right. It's usually pushing it to go beyond the first couple, it seems like. But when you have a successful franchise, why not push it until you hit the wall, I guess?
Now, I want to talk about, and I mentioned this earlier, And I know it's kind of a favorite movie of mine, and many people say, what the heck, how could this be a favorite movie of anybody's? But it's a movie about redemption. It's a movie about feeling that you're kind of have lived a life that's been worthless, and you've lost many opportunities, and maybe you've even lost your fame and the people that you love. And so you're presented by a scary monster, presented with a scary monster, and your ability to battle this monster somehow redeems yourself. And the movie I'm thinking of is Bubba Hotep, which came out in the 80s, and is a fanciful tale about, and it stars Bruce Campbell, if you know who that guy is. I think he was in Army of Darkness, and he plays kind of comedic horror roles. He kind of has a comedy role in many horror movies. But anyway, this is the capsule summary of Bubba Hotep is that the Bruce Campbell character is Elvis Presley. And Elvis Presley didn't die of a drug overdose. It was an Elvis impersonator that died of a drug overdose. And he took the place of the Elvis impersonator and threw out his hip. And he's still alive, and he's confined to a nursing home in East Texas. And the other character of note here is Ossie Davis, who's a very, very great stage actor. He passed away here not too long ago. But he plays a guy who thinks he's John F. Kennedy. And there's a really funny scene, of course. Ossie Davis is African American, and Bruce Campbell and he are talking back and forth about why Ossie Davis thinks he's John F. Kennedy, and the Bruce Campbell character, the Elvis character, says, I hate to tell you this, but you're certifiable because you're an African American and John Kennedy was a white guy. And then Ossie Davis has a quick comeback and says, well, yeah, but they dyed me black after they allegedly shot me. But what's redemptive about this is there's a mummy, an Egyptian mummy, that's being transported to some exhibit, and there's a bus crash, and this mummy falls in a river that's right next to this nursing home. The mummy comes alive, and so you've got like this Boris Karloff mummy kind of thing that at night is stalking the halls of this nursing home, killing people. And Ossie Davis is the first person to see it, and then convinces the Bruce Campbell character that there really is a mummy there. And the redemptive part of this movie, the cool part of it to me, even though it's kind of a comedy, horror comedy kind of thing, is Elvis is just waiting to die, and so is the Ossie Davis character. And they're bemoaning the fact they weren't good husbands and fathers, but they kind of rise to the occasion to battle the mummy to save the rest of the people in this nursing home. And Elvis, who's confined to a walker, even loses his walker. He gets decked out in one of his old performance, one of his old sequin uniforms he used to perform in, and he and Ossie Davis one night go out and try to exterminate this mummy. So it's really kind of an unusual movie. It's a horror movie. It's primarily a comedy movie with Bruce Campbell and Ossie Davis, but it really has that redemptive quality because at the end they both die, but they save everybody in the nursing home from the mummy.
Now, I did see that. I did watch that upon your recommendation. It's been a while, and now I remember everything you're talking about. A really bizarre take on the hero's journey, isn't it? I think that horror movies are the hero's journey on steroids because there's somebody who gets called to action and is hesitant or unwilling or unprepared, but they end up having to literally fight through facing the most bizarre and powerful of enemies, and they have to get through to the end, which is, of course, the hero's journey. It's a call to action, someone who doesn't want to be the hero, but you eventually build up your strength, you rise to the occasion, you find redemption for whoever was wronged, if it was you or a family member. All the superhero movies are kind of like that, and you're kind of left as the lone. A lot of superhero movies, interesting parallel you see there is that even between, say, Spider-Man and the college co-ed who has to slash her way through, she has to learn how to use a chainsaw and defeat Jason or Freddy Krueger or whoever. It's interesting that thread runs through such a wide variety of movies.
Yeah, I really like that insight because the three of the movies that we've talked a lot about, the Alien, the Exorcist, and what was I forgot what the third movie was. But both in the movie Alien and the Exorcist, you see people with this hero's journey. Mm-hmm. You see them kind of the reluctant hero, I guess, is part of that.
Right.
You know?
Right.
And well, and I suppose Bubba. The third movie is Bubba Hotep, the one we're talking about. So that theme does seem to run through those movies.
And it's such it's the fundamental theme that you see in movies in Hollywood or elsewhere. And I've always been fascinated by that concept, because is it something that's inherent in people? Are we just drawn to it because we remember something? Is there some collective, even subconscious memory, again, bubbling beneath the surface, something that happened in the past that we know of intuitively? Does it go back to our religious stories, that hero's journey? Is it some past epic where we had a journey across space against all odds to see the human race on Earth or something? You can get into all those other topics that we like to talk about, the ancient astronauts and ancient civilizations, but that theme that we just keep going back to again and again, we can't seem to get enough of it in our entertainment. And it makes you wonder, where does that really strong desire to see that theme played out over and over again, where does it come from?
Yeah, it might just maybe a core part of our being.
Mm-hmm.
It does show up in a lot of these stories, though.
And like I said, it seems like the horror movies are just that journey on steroids, sort of crass. There's not a whole lot to it when the goal is to just slash your way through monsters and kill all the monsters and get to the end. That makes you the... But it's so symbolic. Slay your demons, whether it's an actual demon in Carrie or The Exorcist or Poltergeist or whatever, or if it's more symbolic than the monsters. But the other thing that I keep thinking of, and we talked about this in the very beginning, is that the idea of being imprisoned some way is such a common theme, whether you're on a ship in Alien or literally chained up in a room, as in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre or something like that. This idea of being imprisoned and held against your will, I wonder if, because on Anomalies we have an expansive view of reality, and we like to talk about the potential for other realities or other dimensions. I keep coming back to, is this theme that we strive to see replayed over and over, is that a reflection of our own feeling that we're in some sort of prison, maybe a 3D prison, where we're not able to access other dimensions or other maybe innate abilities that humans, it appears that humans have at least some time on some level. And the collective unconscious, that those sort of ideas, are we really wishing that we could tap into that? And maybe at some point in the past, were we able to tap into that? And maybe that's why it keeps coming up and we're drawn to it. That's just what I'm thinking. The whole imprisonment thing seems to be such a common theme that runs through these bits of entertainment.
Well, I think we have identified some universal themes, and there's a reason they're universal, I think, because the commonality is there for some reason, maybe because, like you said, it touches a pretty core basis for us, or it's just easily understandable. It's an easily translatable story no matter what culture you're in. Good versus evil seems to be pretty much easily translated. I mean, people know that. They know that kind of story when they see that. They know who the villains are and who the heroes are. So, well, any other insights as to why we like to be scared? How horror movies draw us in? Any other favorite movies that seem to have some of these elements?
I sort of expanding on what I just talked about. I believe it was Day of the Dead. Either that or it was Dawn of the Dead. I think it was.
There were many of those. And your comment was they probably made a brunch of the dead, too.
Day of the Dead, the Evening of the Dead, the pre-dawn day of the whatever. Something, as long as it has dead in the title, I guess.
As long as it's about zombies.
I guess it was a moneymaker back in the early 80s or whatever. Now it's all about zombies, which is interesting because zombie is such a symbolic thing too. It's humanity devoid of what we think of makes us humans.
The mindlessness.
The lack of empathy, the animalistic, the lack of feeling, emotion, which I think again is there. I'm sure there are all sorts of theories from sociology about why this would be and why we focus on it, why it's such a big fear, losing contact with each other as a as a society or community or a common group. And Day of the Dead it has one of those scenes that sticks with me where basically the scientists, the people involved, they managed to capture a zombie and one of these mindless animals, and they chained it up, of course, and they even gave it a name. I wish I could remember the name. I'm sure you can Google it and find the name of the zombie. And so there's this whole sequence in the movie where the scientists they're basically observing, and while the thing is grunting and pulling at the restraints and trying to kill people, which is what zombies do. But in this case, they managed to calm the thing down, and they started to sort of get some communication going between them. And I think there was one particular character that developed a fondness for the
zombie.
Well, some sort of bond
Okay.
between the creature. Now I have to admit, we'd have to look at it. I don't remember exactly what happened, but I believe the zombie ended up eating the guy who developed the bond.
So much for the bond.
So, it was one of those where you couldn't resist. I'm sure the director or the story writer couldn't resist that, because that's what you go for,
Mm-hmm.
what you go look for in a movie like that. You want to see the animal come out and the demon come out and create as much destruction as possible before the hero saves the day at the end.
Yeah, because otherwise it's just a relationship movie, and then if it's going to be a movie like that, it's not going to be a horror movie.
Right, but that brings up the whole imprisonment thing, the whole animalistic, again, it's symbolic of trying to reconnect with the animal, to tame the animal
Mm-hmm.
Tendency and separate ourselves from the animalistic.
Right, and the two movies, and they're an older and a more contemporary version of this movie, the Wolfman. The original Wolfman with Lon Chaney Jr., and then Universal remade that movie with Anthony Hopkins and I'm drawing a blank on his name. The Lon Chaney character is played by, it'll come to me after a while, but actually this guy even looks like Lon Chaney. But that movie is essentially about the dualistic nature of humanity, the civilized part of us, because in both of those films, the character who becomes the Wolfman is an aristocrat and a nobleman, and is thought well of in the surrounding areas. But when he transforms into the Wolfman, he's a beast, and he murders people. And so it's like, maybe becomes a comment about both sides of human nature, this darker side, which again is the good and evil kind of thing. Those stories about good and evil are really just stories about our own human nature.
And struggling to not slide back into the animalistic archetype, I guess. One thing that I don't even remember which movie it is, that I don't know where this falls in the whole continuum of what movies are trying to convey, but maybe it was a Hannibal Lecter type movie or something like that. Was that maybe the second one? Anyway, I think it was possibly the second one, Silence of the Lambs, whatever. There was a sequel, I think.
I think it was Hannibal, was the name of the second one.
Was that the one
where he escaped?
Ray Liotta?
Yeah, eats his own brain.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is
one scene that there's just so many things that are wrong with that, where he's sitting there, again, we're talking about the zombie state, the zombified automaton state, and Hannibal fries up his brain, right?
Right.
Or his skull is open for some reason. Not to get too graphic, but this is an internet podcast, so we can go wherever we want.
You create your own imagery here.
And he feeds his own brain, which is just, like I said, so many things wrong with that. It's just almost beyond comprehension. But it doesn't come across to me as purely gratuitous slasher violence. I mean, there's something more to that scene.
More symbolic.
That really disturbs you at your very core.
Well, but I think that scene is a little bit like the alien exploding from John Hurt's chest. It's a gross out component to that, eating your own brain. That just seems gross, but there is some symbolism about being controlled and being an automaton, but it seems also kind of part of that gross out component of horror, where someone's forced to eat their own brain.
Yeah, the symbolism of consuming your own source of knowledge is it's very circular in a very disgusting way.
Right.
And the idea that the brain of the person perpetrating such a gruesome event, action, is also mind-boggling. To think of where could that come from. Talk about losing your humanity. Who could be capable of doing something like that? And again, that is a reflection of reality in society with serial killers and people who torture, and I think humans have not been able to evolve beyond that. We still see that today, We see it in our own country, actually, where torture is somehow made acceptable given the idea that we're in a war against the other or whatever. So we don't need to go into that because that opens a whole bunch of cans of worms, but it seems like something that humans are struggling with and have been for forever. And I think horror movies, they really open up those conflicts and those ideas in a very, blatant, in-your-face, visually and auditorily rich fashion. And maybe that's why we're drawn to them, because they tweak, they push all the right buttons for us.
Well, and I know I've had my buttons pushed on numerous occasions in horror movies. So.
It's fun to open yourself to that, but it does appear that it's not just all fun. It's really the symbolism beneath it is really pushing at something that's at our core, and it may be, again, it could be some sort of wake-up call, the idea that we enjoy it so much or feel drawn to it.
And maybe to bring us back to Stephen King's observation, it's a controlled, reading a book about a horror story or watching a horror movie or some experience like that, it's a controlled jump into that prison or a controlled jump into that place that you shouldn't go, but you're going to go anyway because it's curious. You can always pull yourself out by closing the book, or the movie's going to be over. Well, happy Halloween, Dave.
Happy Halloween too, Dan.
Hopefully this podcast touches on the spirit of Halloween, which is about a lot of things, but it's certainly about being scared.
And candy.
And candy, don't forget that. And by the way, what's your favorite, to end up on a lighter note, rather than all this horror stuff, what's your favorite Halloween candy?
I like chocolate. I like, say, a Milky Way or chocolate and caramel stuff. Or dark chocolate, but I'm a chocolate guy. What about you?
Well, just to show you my age here, my favorite Halloween candy, and this speaks to our horror theme of horror, my favorite Halloween candy was actually the baked goods that people used to put in your Halloween sack when I was a little kid. Because I would go to people's houses, and they would have Halloween cookies with icing on them. And then there was that big scare about people, here's the horror factor, people putting razor blades and tainting candy with poison, and so pretty soon we went to the Milky Way bars that were prepackaged, and nobody gave you any icing, sugar cookies for Halloween. So that was my favorite kind of thing. But
that's pretty good, yeah. Homemade treats.
Right.
And by the way, what I've read, there was never an apple with a razor blade in it, but that's one of those urban legends that, again, we almost are tempted into scaring ourselves and keeping alive, because it adds a little bit of the flavor of the season to Halloween, and we just like to scare ourselves, apparently.
Right, and I'll never take another baked good from somebody trick-or-treating at their door. Of course, at my age, it's probably horrific to just think I would be out there trick-or-treating. So
I don't think they'd open the door for you.
I'm sure, and I wouldn't even have to be dressed in costume. They just wouldn't open the door. All right, thanks, Dave, for another great episode of Anomalies.
I'm afraid you might hurt yourself, Reagan.
I'm not Reagan.
I see. Well, then let's introduce ourselves. I'm Damien Cowes.
And I'm the devil.